Hello world of YouTube. Let's leave 2018 behind and close off that chapter with the last list of List Week 2018. My top 20 albums that came out in the past year. Now, I felt like out of all of the years that I've covered music on the internet, this had the densest amount of releases and the biggest quantity of quality outings from various artists through various genres. Some genres got bigger re-injections of prominence, some figureheads really reinvented themselves in great ways, and there was a lot of good shit that came out this year, and this was a hard list to make for sure. But I'm very happy with this 20, and I hope you will be too. Let's get into it. Nicolas Jarre made a hypnotic experience with 2012 through 2017, featuring a bunch of songs that have a bit of a throwback sound. And this won't be the last time I talk about this throwback sound, but this album really reminded me of the mid-90s, a lot of the electronics that were happening around there, and it helps that he injects a lot of really sharp samples into it. This reminded me of the Avalanche's debut record, which was a myriad of samples woven around these dance electronics, and this does something of a similar style with a bit of a modern twist on how some of the songs progress as they continue. There's a lot of charm in here, and there's a lot of energy on this that stays constant, even if it's ebbing and flowing throughout a bunch of different tempos.
In reality, alright, tonight is...
I've been waiting for this for the past 3 years, since I started doing the listening logs. Twerp have been a Canadian synth funk band that I've followed pretty closely, given that they've collaborated with some artists in the YouTube sphere that I really enjoy. And on this, their first album either ever or in a long time, they pull together all of the ideas they've been toying with over the last 3 years and make it a full-fledged cohesive project. There's a lot of tight guitars, really fat meaty bass lines, and some super lush synth tones with vocalists coming from different aspects of the scene coming together and enhancing their very utopian sounding atmosphere. I can't put this thing down, and I think that if there's an album to get you into these guys or a release that they've done, it's this one. It does everything that they've done thus far in the career perfectly. Funke was actually one of the few artists I checked out each of the releases that they dropped this year, and he came together with this ambient guitarist and made one of the more interesting listens in his career that's happened in a while. I love that he retained a lot of the abrasive and harsh electronics and breakbeat style that he's known for, but he injected a lot of harmony and ambience to it that made this really harsh dichotomy amongst his already disengaging music. I love the style of this thing, and I love the consistency within its tone and its atmosphere. It's really erratic and jarring in all of the right ways, and in a year full of really great electronic releases, Venetian Snares showed why he is still a mainstay in the scene. George Clanton's latest shows that there are plenty of ways that you can reinvigorate the 90s and spin it into a modern spectrum. We have this fascination with that decade, both in and out of music, and out of all of the albums this year that reminded me of that decade, this is the best of it. At least when it comes to electronic artists. His meldings of these alternative pop sensibilities with chill wave atmospheres and tones is harmonious melding that kept bringing me back to its really, really serene atmosphere. One of the calmest releases I threw on this year, and one that kept sticking around in the background whenever I needed something really, really mellow to just vibe to. I love George Clanton's style, I love his aesthetic that he presents on this thing, and I think that he's set a great precedent for how to reinvent chillwave in 2018. It's catchy, it's beautiful, and it's just a huge wave of calm that I felt like the year really needed.
Here's an example. If Joe Blow says show you being like a bungee.
I'm like many fans of music that came of age in the 2000s. I love Jack White. I love his guitar tone, I love his sound, and I love his style. And I also really love his influences. And I feel like on Boarding House Reach, he finally brought in some influences of his into the forefront that have been kind of sitting in the backbeat for decades. I think this thing is weird, it's quirky in all of the right ways. I like that he melds his very idiosyncratic approach to blues rock with these very abstract and experimental doses of rock music that, while this year has had a large quantity of, Jack White made a statement in making one of his boldest records he's ever made across all of his projects, and one of his most fun to listen to. He got to pen some really different types of lyrics here because he was adventurous, because he was abstract, and that's why I walked away from this thing loving the experience I had. Not the only stoner release I really loved this year. Sleeps the Sciences injected their very THC-inspired sounds into the motherfucking stratosphere with grand images and a scope larger than most in the genre. I love how dirty and gritty this thing is, and I like how it has these little twists and turns in the sound that I wasn't fully expecting. I'm a big fan of this sound, and I feel like Sleep just executed it masterfully here. It is dirty, it is disgusting, it is grotesque in all of the right ways, and while it's not the only thing to come from these guys this year as far as the members, it is the best any of them have done in a while, in a long while, and it shows that Sleep still hold a firm grip on the scene in the right ways. I didn't expect for Turnstile to reinvent themselves in any sort of capacity because Nonstop Feeling was such a just consistent, blunt smack to the face with a sledgehammer. And while Time and Space has a lot of that in bigger doses, they do explore some sonic vignettes that further tie their sound down to that early 90s aesthetic from the hardcore scene. It almost reminds me of more of a Bad Brains offcut than it does a straight up just Angry Jane's Addiction. I like the places they take their sound, even if it's very straight-laced, hard-hitting, and fast by the by. It still has some surprises in the mix that I wasn't expecting, and still, man, this shit is just lights a fire under my ass in the best way. It's so aggressive, it's so heavy, and it's so retro in all the right ways.
And the Dolly Chicago overzealous for talent though. Westside get the money, it's still a classic. Moving to LA now.
While I had not checked her debut mixtape, this album is so fantastically done. Noname weaves these really tight lyrics in a way that I hadn't heard a newcomer do in a long time. Noname really cements herself as a voice to be heard and a name to be looking out for in the future with this debut album. The instrumentals are sleek, her features are just as good as she is, and she has a lot of really poignant topics to say in a really stylish way to say them. On par with their beloved material, Beach House's 7th outing is such a dirtier experience in all the right ways. While there were other acts that were dirtying up their sound this year, Beach House did it in a way that melded with their already well-established foundation in a way that made so much sense. You know, you would expect them to eventually get a little dirtier, but it doesn't come at the cost of sacrificing anything that made them great to begin with. I think the vocals are still so siren-esque. I think the mixes on here are still very beautiful, and I think that there's still a lot of catchy charm beneath a lot of these dense soundscapes, and it was kind of a surprise to me, but I really, really loved this thing. One of the most cacophonous releases I've heard in a long time, Portal's latest cements themselves as a staple in the modern death metal scene. One of the most disengaging releases all year, and one of the biggest challenges I had to face. This is just an all-out assault on the senses from second one. It's a release that grabs you and doesn't let go until it's over. It is incredibly visceral, incredibly jagged, and incredibly unappealing, but I couldn't put it down. It is addictive in its denseness and its harshness, and It is the best record they've ever done, and one of the best the genre has had this whole decade. My introduction to Mitski's discography is one filled with a lot of personal nuance to its lyrics and a very detailed songwriting that I was very happy to hear. And I love her atmosphere that she chooses to go with. It kind of fits the indie scope, but it's got its own charm within it that feels very intrinsically herself. I love the guitar tones she uses and the synth tones that she pairs them with, and I feel like these are a lot of really tight, somber cuts that have a touch of brightness to them as far as the soundscape is considered. One that got me incredibly enamored with the rest of her catalog, and I'm excited to do a deep dive into the rest of what she has to offer. Sophie's full-length debut is very loose and free in all of the right ways. I love how deconstructed this thing sounds. As I said in my review, I think that it is a showcase of Sophie's talents as a producer because everything feels so perfectly put together. The loose presentation doesn't detract from any of the sonic elements in any regard, and I think that that's a testament to her talents as well. I love a lot of the hook work that's here. I think the harmonies are beautiful, and I love how accented these percussion elements also sound when they're utilized. I think that it is sparse when it needs to be, and it's erratic when it has to be, and it delivers on all fronts in almost every regard. I get that I am in a very small camp for loving this record as much as I do, but I think that this is on par with their Golden Age material. It is a big step above their comeback record that dropped last year, and I love the focus on one of the band members' atmospheres. While yes, it would have been nice to hear from the other band members' perspectives, I do think that it was smart for them to pull back on the features, even if there are a few still in the mix. I love the shimmery backdrops for 2D to just spout his sadness over, and I'm a sucker for that. It reminds me of their first album in a lot of really good ways, and it has me excited again to hear what Damon Albarn has in store for his animated little concoction.
Copy, carbon.
Absolutely, without a doubt, the best thing Kanye and Kid Cudi have ever been a part of, at least in the last 10 years. I think that this runs a small gauntlet in its 7-track listing. It melds so many different ideals from different subsects of music together perfectly. Really, my only complaint is the second track. It's great, but it doesn't fit the rest of the record. It's the one point where they dip off into something else, and it doesn't pay off for them, to me personally. But I think everything around that is the best that's ever come out of Kid Cudi's career, without a doubt, and the best Kanye West has ever been in a long time. Excellence on all fronts, and I really hope that they actually do something together again, whether it be in a solo outing or in another record like this. It's a great instance on where a masterpiece came out of what could have been a series of missteps. A disengaging release for a myriad of other reasons, Daughters came back with a record that is downright disturbing and eerie with a lot of its lyrical textures and soundscapes the band toys with. It's noisy, it's disjointed, it's fierce, it's domineering in all of the right ways. I love the synthetic tones that they coat this thing with. I love how noisy these guitars are, and I love how their vocalist just sounds a little off-kilter throughout the entire runtime. It's a record that everyone loves. You know, I love it. Most of you probably love it. A lot of the critical scene really seems to dig it as well, and I'm just another voice in that fire. In a year full of career-defining releases from artists, these New York art punkers made the best album for the genre in decades. Combining sharp, poignant lyricism with impeccable production that sounds lifted from the late 70s, shows that this genre can still hold a firm place in the zeitgeist. It's got a lively track listing that gives fans something to shout from the rafters, some cheeky moments you'd want from a great punk outing, and adds another dose of flair to an already amazing year for the genre of punk. It's got the teeth of a punk album, it's just far more stylish.
You die with a big old piece of American pie.
This Kansas City queen comes back in full force, combining some of the Afro-futurecentrism from her first couple of releases with a sleek, funky, R&B, hip-hop tinged opus that puts a lot of Americana ideals on their head, sonically, with lyrics that are incredibly forward-thinking, very empowering, one of the most addictive releases I encountered all year. Even amidst all of its genre infusions and hopping, it doesn't sound sporadic. It just sounds smooth and seamless as it goes from each style to the next. It's fucking infectious as hell, man. You could say I have a bit of a bias to Trent Reznor, but I'd still argue this is the most interesting thing Trent has churned out in at least a decade. I think him adding Atticus Ross really solidified a good foundation for the band. I think that the addition and expansion on Jazzier Nuance that was only in one song on the last Nine Inch Nails record benefited them fantastically. I love how erratic this thing is. I love how paranoid it sounds. And I think Trent sounds better here than he has since With Teeth. It's bleak, it's dark, it's grim, and it's fucking perfect. This almost was my album of the year. You know, the only reason why it isn't is because I am so addicted to the #1 spot. But Beastland by Author and Punisher is such a disgustingly sinister industrial project. It's grim, it's nihilistic, it is cold, it is everything I want from an industrial project and more. I love how hypnotic this thing is. I love how these drones just envelop me in this wave of machinery. I love the creativity of the composition of this project, and I think Author and Punisher made a giant fan out of me, because this is my introduction to his discography, and I feel like he knocked this record out of the fucking park. But again, the only reason why it's not my #1 is because I was just a little more enamored and addicted to my #1 pick, which is...
The bastards make you not want to look like you, so you pay.
Hands down the most quotable album of the year. Idols surprised the fuck out of me by adding a lot of charm and self-awareness to their heavily politicized lyrics. I think that this is the best turnaround I've seen from an artist in years, and I think that this is such a fun fucking record. You know, Brutalism is a very slate, stern, driving punk record, and this has a lot of the same ideals. It's just a fuck ton more fun to listen to. I still can't put this thing down. I think that they expanded their sound in all of their right ways, and I've heard they're already writing their third album. I really hope they can knock it out of the park with a trifecta, but I'm still really happy with submitting them as a back-to-back album of the year slot, because this is what I love to see with quick turnaround records, and I love these guys now. I am a stan for Idols, and I am heavily anticipating to see whatever the fuck they pull together next. It's sharp, it's witty, it's jagged, it's ruthless, and it's just so fucking rugged. It is without a doubt the best album I heard in all of 2018. And that's been 2018. Hopefully you enjoyed this and all of my other lists. Hopefully you enjoyed the content I put out last year. I have some smaller videos coming out next week. I got an update, an album that's an offshoot from one of the albums videos I shot last year, and an alternate take review. I'm hoping to ease into 2019 a little smoother after this. Hopefully you guys are excited for what I got next year. I'm gonna go. I have been ViralRak. You guys have good ideas, thoughts, and situations, and I'll see you another day.